in the vast expanse of the Milky Way Galaxy, where thousands of species had achieved interstellar travel and formed a collective government that spanned multiple spiral arms, but humanity was considered. Well, let's just say developing. That's the polite term the Galactic Empire used for species they viewed as only marginally more evolved than a particularly clever fungus. Jack Reynolds had never given much thought to humanity's galactic standing. As a former member of Earth's most elite Special Forces unit, one so classified that even its acronym was redacted, Jack's concerns were typically more immediate, like how to extract a high-value target from a hostile environment using nothing but a paperclip and sheer determination, or how to survive 3 weeks in Arctic conditions with only a Swiss Army knife and his wits. The usual Tuesday stuff. "So let me get this straight," Jack said, leaning back in a chair that seemed designed specifically to make human spines scream in agony. "You want me, a member of a species your empire classifies somewhere between quaint and potentially useful pets, to serve as the personal bodyguard to the most powerful being in the known universe? Emperor Zoltan the Magnificent, ruler of the Galactic Empire, 17-time winner of the Trans-Dimensional Chess Championship, and proud owner of the galaxy's largest collection of extinct species preserved in amber, smiled with all three of his mouths. "Precisely, Mr. Reynolds. And may I add, your grasp of the situation is refreshingly direct. Most beings would have spent the next 20 minutes prostrating themselves and thanking me for the opportunity." Jack shrugged. "Not really my style, Your Magnificence. Excellency. What's the proper way to address someone who technically owns the star my planet orbits?" "Emperor will suffice," Zoltan said, his middle mouth twitching in what Jack assumed was amusement. "And to address your unspoken question, yes, I am fully aware of humanity's classification in our encyclopedias. I personally adjusted it from primarily harmless to approach with calculated caution after what your species refers to as the Mars incident." Jack winced. "In our defense, nobody told us that the red dust was sentient." "Indeed. Quite the diplomatic snafu," the Emperor waved a tentacle dismissively. "But it's precisely this unpredictability that makes you perfect for the position." 3 standard galactic days earlier, Jack had been enjoying a well-deserved vacation on one of Jupiter's recently terraformed moons. The resort had been advertised as the most relaxing spot this side of Alpha Centauri, which Jack had taken as a challenge rather than a promise. His relaxation was interrupted when he happened to witness what appeared to be a routine maintenance worker doing very non-routine things to the environmental controls in a private dining pod. The same pod where, as Jack later learned, Emperor Zoltan was scheduled to have lunch with the Ambassadorial Council. Most people would have reported the suspicious activity to security. Jack, being Jack, decided to handle it personally. The would-be assassin, a gelatinous being from the Andromeda Galaxy with 17 independently functioning brains, never saw the human coming. "Your security protocols are garbage," Jack told the Emperor bluntly. "Your guards rely too heavily on predictive algorithms. Anyone with half a brain, or in that assassin's case, 8.5 brains, can work around them." "Precisely why I need you," Emperor Zoltan said, his primary eyes glowing with what might have been enthusiasm. "Every other species in the Empire has evolved to rely on technology, logic, and predictable response patterns. Humans are." He paused, searching for the right word, chaotically intuitive. "We're unpredictable," Jack translated. "Magnificently so. Your species makes decisions based on what you call gut feelings. You act on impulse. You defy statistical probability with alarming regularity. Do you know that our most advanced AI systems still cannot predict human behavior with more than 73% accuracy? It's maddening and fascinating." Jack considered this. "So you want me as your bodyguard because I'm unpredictable?" "I want you as my bodyguard because whoever is trying to assassinate me is using that predictability against my current security team. I need someone who thinks differently." "And your court? I'm guessing they're not thrilled about having a primitive human as the Emperor's shadow." All 3 of the Emperor's mouths curved into what Jack recognized as a mischievous grin. "Oh, they're absolutely horrified. Which I must admit is an added bonus. There's nothing quite like watching High Chancellor Vrex Tool's eye stalks quiver with indignation." Jack couldn't help but smile. "When do I start?" The Emperor's middle mouth widened. You already have, Mr. Reynolds. Welcome to the most dangerous job in the galaxy. If Jack thought the Emperor's personal quarters were ostentatious, the Imperial Court made them look like a monk's cell by comparison. The grand hall of cosmic deliberation stretched for what seemed like miles, its ceiling a perfect recreation of the galaxy that constantly shifted to showcase different star systems. The floor was made of a material that adjusted its consistency based on each species' preferred walking surface. For Jack, it felt like polished marble. For the slug-like mucosians from Betelgeuse V, it was probably something considerably more slippery. Announcing his Imperial Magnificence, Emperor Zoltan the Magnificent, unifier of the 7 spiral arms, conqueror of the void, master of time and space, keeper of the sacred flame, and the royal announcer, a tall avian being with elaborate purple plumage, faltered as he spotted Jack standing beside the Emperor. And guessed, he finished lamely. All conversation in the court ceased. Hundreds of alien faces, some with multiple sets of eyes, others with no discernible features at all, turned simultaneously toward the entrance. Jack could practically feel the collective shock rippling through the assembly. That is no mere guest, announcer Plithax, Emperor Zoltan corrected, his primary voice booming across the hall. This is Jack Reynolds of Earth, my new personal bodyguard. The silence that followed was so complete that Jack could hear the soft hum of the artificial gravity generators. Then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted into chaos. Your Magnificence. This is unprecedented. High Chancellor Vrex Tool scuttled forward on his 8-segmented legs. His eye stalks, true to the Emperor's prediction, were quivering wildly. A human bodyguard. Why not just arm yourself with a pointy stick? Jack smiled pleasantly. The stick was my backup plan if this didn't work out. Admiral Phineas Zorb, whose species had evolved from something resembling Earth octopi, but with significantly more tentacles and significantly less humor, floated forward. Unlike most of the court who wore elaborate robes and ceremonial armor, Zorb was clad in the sleek black uniform of the Imperial fleet. With all due respect, Emperor, Zorb said, managing to make respect sound like utter disbelief, humans lack the neural processing capacity to manage complex security protocols. Their reaction times are positively glacial compared to our synthroid guards. Perhaps that explains why 3 synthroids failed to notice an assassin rewiring the Emperor's dining pod, Jack commented casually. Too busy processing complex security protocols to notice someone actually trying to kill him. Admiral Zorb's skin flushed a deep purple, which Jack guessed was either embarrassment or rage, but possibly both. The human has a point. This came from Lady Mila Q-Arts, whose crystalline body refracted light in hypnotic patterns as she moved toward them. As the Empire's Minister of Information, she was responsible for all intelligence gathering and analysis. Our security systems are designed to detect logical threats following established patterns. The recent attempts have been irregular. Irregular like having a primitive ape descendant as royal protection. Chancellor Vrex Tool's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Jack assumed was the insectoid equivalent of a sneer. I prefer tactically unpredictable, Jack said. Emperor Zoltan's middle mouth formed what Jack now recognized as his version of a smirk. My decision is final, Chancellor. Mr. Reynolds has already demonstrated his effectiveness. While my entire security detail was scanning for energy weapons and poison, he alone noticed someone tampering with environmental controls. Pure luck, Admiral Zorb muttered, his tentacles coiling tightly. Perhaps the Emperor conceded. But luck is a concept our Empire has little experience with, is it not? Our algorithms, our predictions, our entire civilization is built on certainty. Yet certainty has failed to keep me alive these past few months. Jack surveyed the court, taking mental notes on each being. The Chancellor with his barely concealed contempt, Admiral Zorb, whose tentacles seemed to be inching towards something beneath his uniform whenever the Emperor wasn't looking directly at him. Lady Q-Arts, whose crystalline features were impossible to read, but whose posture seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile. I've assigned quarters for you adjacent to my own, Emperor Zoltan told him. You'll have full access to all security systems and protocols. That is highly irregular, protested a new voice. A tall, thin being with grey skin and a head that tapered to a point glided forward. "I am Grand Vizier Dawn, Keeper of Imperial Protocol. No being below clearance level Alpha has ever had such access." "Make an exception," the Emperor said simply. "I'll need to review the security systems anyway," Jack added. "If they're as predictable as I think they are, we'll need to make some changes." The Grand Vizier looked as though he might faint at the suggestion. Changes? To systems designed by the greatest minds in the galaxy. "Yep," Jack said cheerfully. "Starting with random security sweeps using methods your systems wouldn't predict." "Such as?" Lady Keyarts asked, sounding genuinely interested. Jack smiled. "If I told you, it wouldn't be unpredictable, would it?" As the court dissolved into fresh arguments, Jack caught the Emperor watching him with amusement. For an all-powerful galactic ruler with multiple assassination attempts under his belt, Zoltan seemed to be enjoying the chaos quite a bit. "They're going to test me," Jack said quietly to the Emperor. "Probably sooner rather than later." Undoubtedly, all three of the Emperor's mouths agreed simultaneously. "I'm counting on it." Jack had been the Emperor's bodyguard for precisely 27 hours when the accidental security breach occurred. He'd spent most of that time reviewing the palace's security systems, which were simultaneously the most advanced he'd ever seen and, to his mind, utterly useless. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered as he studied the holographic display showing the palace's defensive grid. "Everything is automated. Predictable response patterns to predictable threats." The AI security system, which called itself Sentinel and spoke in a voice that managed to sound both melodious and condescending, disagreed. "The Imperial security protocols have been refined over 7 centuries and incorporate the defensive wisdom of 12,000 species. And not one of them thought to include random security sweeps or manual override options. Randomness introduces the possibility of error," Sentinel replied primly. "The Imperial Court cannot tolerate error." "But apparently they can tolerate dead emperors," Jack muttered. He was in the middle of arguing with Sentinel about implementing what he called chaos protocols when the alarms began blaring. Red lights pulsed throughout the Emperor's private quarters, and a translucent shield immediately formed around Zoltan, who had been reviewing trade agreements with the Proxima Centauri system. "Breach in Sector 7G," Sentinel announced calmly, deploying countermeasures. Jack watched as the security display showed dozens of synth-droid guards converging on the breach point in a textbook containment formation. Textbook. "Call them back," Jack ordered. Sentinel's holographic interface flickered in what might have been surprise. "Protocol dictates." "I don't care what protocol dictates. That's exactly what they're expecting. To call them back." The Emperor, still encased in his protective bubble, nodded his approval. Sentinel reluctantly complied. "Now show me the maintenance tunnels near Sector 7G, Jack demanded. The display shifted to reveal a labyrinthine network of passages. "Thought so. They're not coming from the breach point. That's a distraction." Without waiting for approval, Jack grabbed his decidedly low-tech equipment, a standard-issue combat knife, a small canister of what the quartermaster had called universal incapacitant, and an energy pistol he'd insisted on despite the court's protests about humans and weapons. "Stay in your bubble. Your Magnificence," Jack ordered. A breach of protocol that made Sentinel's hologram turn an indignant shade of red. "I'll be right back." Jack sprinted not toward the breach, but in the opposite direction, toward a small maintenance hatch that the security display had shown was conveniently located just 2 corridors away. As he ran, he heard the confused chatter of the synthroid guards in his earpiece, all reporting that the breach had been a false alarm, a malfunction in a waste disposal unit. Of course it was, Jack muttered as he reached the maintenance hatch. It was locked with an electronic seal that required proper clearance that Jack, as the Emperor's bodyguard, now possessed. The hatch slid open silently. The maintenance tunnel was cramped even for Jack's human frame, but for most of the larger species in the Empire, it would be completely inaccessible, perfect for an infiltrator who didn't want to be followed. He moved silently through the dimly lit passage. A haze, following not a scanner or tracking device but his instincts, something Sentinel had dismissively described as primitive biological heuristics. Those primitive heuristics led him straight to a figure crouched at a junction in the tunnels. The being was small, grey-skinned, with 4 arms working simultaneously to bypass the security on an access panel. It was wearing the uniform of palace maintenance staff, but moved with the practiced efficiency of someone with military training. "Nice uniform," Jack said conversationally, "but you missed a spot." The infiltrator spun, 2 of its 4 hands reaching for weapons. Jack was faster. The universal incapacitant turned out to be aptly named the grey-skinned, being immediately seized up, its limbs locking in place as a sound like escaping steam emanated from what Jack assumed were its breathing orifices. "One assassin, gift-wrapped and ready for questioning," Jack announced into his comm unit as he zip-tied the paralyzed infiltrator. "You'll find us in Maintenance Tunnel B-17, Junction Point Alpha. And you might want to check what your friend here was doing to the Emperor's private elevator shaft." 20 minutes later, Jack stood in the Imperial Security Center, surrounded by a mixture of bewildered and angry court officials. The infiltrator had been taken to a detention cell, and inspection of the elevator shaft had revealed explosives that would have detonated the next time the Emperor used it. "How did you know?" Admiral Zorb demanded, his tentacles writhing in agitation. The breach was a perfect distraction. All indicators pointed to Sector 7G. It was too perfect, Jack explained. "In my experience, real security breaches are messy, confused. This one followed your containment protocols to the letter, exactly what someone would do if they'd studied those protocols, and I wanted your guards looking in one direction while they worked in another." High Chancellor Vrex Tool's eye stalk swiveled suspiciously. "You're suggesting the infiltrator had inside knowledge of our security systems?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Jack said carefully. "I'm just pointing out that your security is predictable, and predictable means exploitable." Lady Keoartz's crystalline form shimmered thoughtfully. "Perhaps our new human bodyguard has a point. Our systems are optimized for efficiency, not unpredictability." Emperor Zoltan, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke. "I believe this resolves any questions about Mr. Reynolds' capabilities. From now on, he has my authorization to implement whatever security measures he deems necessary." The Grand Vizier Dawn looked ready to dissolve into a puddle of grey goo at this pronouncement. "But, Your Magnificence, there are protocols, traditions." "That nearly got me killed," the Emperor finished, again. "I think we can stand a little human chaos in the interest of Imperial survival, don't you?" As the court officials reluctantly dispersed, Jack caught Admiral Zorb staring at him with an unreadable expression. The Admiral quickly looked away, his tentacles twitching nervously. Interesting, Jack thought. Very interesting indeed. The Grand Galactic Trade Summit was the most important diplomatic event in the Empire's calendar. Representatives from over 3,000 worlds gathered in the Celestial Dome, a massive transparent structure that showcased the spectacular view of the galaxy while protecting attendees from the vacuum of space and, presumably, assassins. Jack stood beside Emperor Zoltan as dignitaries filed in, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Unlike the Emperor's previous security detail, who wore elaborate ceremonial armor and carried ornate energy weapons, Jack was dressed in a simple black uniform with minimal visible equipment. The court had been horrified by his insistence on dressing down for such an important occasion. "You look like a maintenance worker," High Chancellor Vrex Tool had complained during the pre-summit briefing. "Exactly," Jack had replied with a grin that made the Chancellor's mandibles click in annoyance. Now, as the summit got underway, Jack remained vigilant. The Emperor had insisted on making his traditional opening address despite Jack's security concerns, but they'd compromised with a few adjustments to the standard protocol. Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Empire, Emperor Zoltan began, his primary voice resonating through the dome. "It is my honor to welcome you to the 4732nd Grand Galactic Trade Summit." Jack noticed Admiral Zorb and Lady Keoartz exchange a subtle glance. Grand Vizier Dawn was positioned near the environmental controls. his grey fingers tapping what appeared to be an innocent ceremonial staff against the floor in a distinct pattern. Before we begin our discussions on interstellar trade policies, the Emperor continued, I would like to address some security concerns that have been brought to my attention. This wasn't in the script. The conspirators visibly tensed all except Lady Qiuart's, whose crystalline features remained unreadable. It has come to my attention, the Emperor said calmly, that there may be individuals within the Imperial Court who do not have the Empire's best interests at heart. The room erupted into murmurs. Jack saw Chancellor Vrex Tool's eye stalk swivel toward Admiral Zorb, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. That was Jack's cue. He pressed a small button on his wrist communicator, and suddenly the Emperor flickered. The holographic projection of Zoltan disappeared, leaving the Imperial dais empty. Chaos erupted. Security protocols activated automatically, sealing all exits and deploying protective shields around the VIP sections. The synth droids moved into defensive formations, their weapons trained on nothing in particular. They hadn't been programmed for this scenario. What is the meaning of this? Chancellor Vrex Tool demanded, his voice rising above the commotion. Where is the Emperor? Good question, Jack said, stepping forward. Where is the Emperor, Chancellor? That's what I'd like to know. Are you? Admiral Zorb pointed an accusatory tentacle at Jack. What have you done with Emperor Zoltan? Me? Nothing. I'm just the primitive human bodyguard, remember? I'm not smart enough to outsmart the galaxy's greatest minds. Jack's tone was casual, but his eyes were hard as he surveyed the room. Interesting that you immediately assumed something happened to him, though. Antoine, Bisan, on Billy. Lady Qiuart stepped forward, her crystalline body catching the light from the surrounding stars. Mr. Reynolds, this is highly irregular. The protocol dictates. Protocol is exactly what nearly got the Emperor killed 3 times, Jack interrupted. So we decided to try something different. Something unpredictable. Something human. The Grand Vizier's staff suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine. Jack smiled grimly. Having trouble with your signal, Vizier? Let me guess it was supposed to trigger something. Perhaps in the environmental controls you're standing next to? Dawn's grey skin paled several shades. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like Admiral Zorb doesn't know about the fleet of unmarked ships currently approaching the palace from Sector 9. Or how Lady Qiuart's information ministry has been feeding false intelligence reports to the Emperor for months. The 3 conspirators exchanged alarmed glances. Chancellor Vrex Tool's mandibles clicked rapidly. These are serious accusations, human. Where is your proof? Right here, came the Emperor's voice, not from the dais, but from among the delegates. A nondescript alien delegate in the 3rd row stood up, his features shifting and melting away to reveal Emperor Zoltan. Apologies for the deception, but Mr. Reynolds insisted on a change of routine. The room fell silent as the Emperor calmly walked to the center of the dome. While I was supposedly preparing for my address, I was actually reviewing some very interesting data provided by my bodyguard. Data showing unauthorized communications between certain court officials and a faction seeking to replace me with a more predictable ruler. Jack stepped forward, holding up his wrist communicator. I've been recording some very interesting conversations over the past few days. Turns out, conspirators get sloppy when they think their plan is working. Chancellor Vrex Tool's eye stalks suddenly extended to their full height. The guards seized the human and the Emperor. They've clearly been compromised. It was the confirmation Jack had been waiting for. In one swift motion, he drew his energy pistol and fired not at any of the conspirators, but at a small device attached to the ceiling that none of them had noticed. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, and suddenly the dome was filled with a fine mist. The synth droids froze in place, their programming disrupted by the electromagnetic pulse from Jack's modified weapon. What have you done? Admiral Zorb gasped, his tentacles writhing in panic. Created confusion, Jack said simply. Humans are really good at operating in confusion. Your fancy security systems And predictable protocols. Not so much. The Emperor, now flanked by loyal guards who had been disguised as delegates, nodded to Jack. Proceed with the arrests, Mr. Reynolds. As the conspirators were surrounded, Lady Keyart's crystalline form vibrated with what might have been laughter. Aggressive human. We underestimated your species. Everyone does, Jack replied with a shrug. That's kind of our whole thing. The aftermath of the failed coup lasted longer than the conspiracy itself. The imperial justice system, with its meticulous attention to procedure and protocol, spent 3 weeks documenting every single aspect of the plot. Jack found the whole process excruciating. You know they're guilty, he complained to Emperor Zoltan as they watched the tribunal proceedings from a private viewing chamber. We literally caught them in the act. Justice must be thorough and transparent, the Emperor replied, his secondary mouth snacking on something that looked suspiciously like popcorn, a human habit he'd apparently picked up from Jack. Besides, I find the Chancellor's eye stalks particularly expressive during cross-examination. On the viewing screen, High Chancellor Vrex Tool's eye stalks were indeed in a state of constant agitation as the Imperial prosecutor presented evidence of his communications with a splinter faction, known as the Logical Order, a group dedicated to removing what they called chaotic elements from the Empire. Chaotic elements like you, Emperor Zoltan noted. And you, Jack added. According to the evidence, they found your interest in extinct species unsettlingly sentimental and your chess strategies illogically intuitive. The highest forms of compliments, the Emperor's 3 mouths smiled simultaneously. The conspirators' ultimate goal had been ambitious: replace Emperor Zoltan with a ruler who would govern purely by logical algorithms and predictable protocols. The logical order had been gaining influence for centuries, pushing the Empire toward ever more standardized and automated systems of governance. They would have replaced you with an AI, Jack said, shaking his head. An actual artificial intelligence, Emperor. Not entirely unprecedented, Zoltan admitted. The Argus cluster has been governed by a quantum intelligence for millennia. And how's that working out for them? They have the galaxy's most efficient public transportation system, the Emperor said, and the highest suicide rate. When the tribunal finally concluded, the sentences were appropriately severe. Admiral Zorb was stripped of his rank and exiled to a remote monitoring station orbiting a pulsar. Lady Keyart's was reprogrammed, a process Jack found disturbing but apparently was considered humane for crystalline beings. Grand Vizier Dawn was sentenced to work as an administrative assistant in the Department of Permit Acquisitions and Form Standardization, a fate he seemed to find worse than death. And Chancellor Vrex Tool was assigned to Earth as the Empire's new ambassador. That's either brilliant or terrible, Jack told the Emperor when he heard the sentence. Humans will drive him absolutely insane. Precisely, Zoltan said, his primary mouth grinning widely. Consider it rehabilitation through exposure therapy. A week after the tribunal concluded, the Emperor held a formal reception to thank Jack for his service. The Imperial Court, thoroughly chastened by the conspiracy revelation, attended in full ceremonial dress. Notably absent were the usual whispers and sneers that had followed Jack during his early days in the palace. They're looking at me differently, Jack observed as he stood beside the Emperor's elevated platform. Less like I'm going to start flinging poo around the room and more like I might actually belong here. Indeed, Emperor Zoltan agreed. Nothing earns respect in the Empire quite like foiling a coup. Except perhaps winning the trans-dimensional chess championship, which I've done 17 times. You might want to drop that into conversation more often, Jack suggested dryly. I feel like people don't know about it. The Emperor's middle mouth quirked in amusement. I have an announcement to make, Mr. Reynolds. Perhaps you'd like to hear it first. I'm all ears. Well, 2 ears. Which is apparently the right number for humans, despite what that medical officer tried to tell me last week. I'm establishing a new division of Imperial security, the Emperor said, one focused on unpredictability, intuition, and what you call gut feelings. And I want you to lead it. Jack blinked in surprise. You want me to train aliens to think like humans? Not exactly, Zoltan said. I want you to recruit humans to protect the Empire's most valuable assets. Your species has a unique cognitive approach that our predictive models simply cannot replicate. As much as it pains the Imperial Scientific Academy to admit it, humanity's chaotic thinking may be your greatest evolutionary advantage. So you're saying being unpredictable is our superpower? I'm saying. The Emperor clarified that in a galaxy where advanced civilizations have become dangerously dependent on algorithms and predictable patterns, your species represents something invaluable, genuine innovation. And predictability isn't primitive, Mr. Reynolds. It's the next stage of evolutionary advantage. Jack considered this for a moment. Does this promotion come with a raise? All three of the Emperor's mouths smiled. Of course. Then I accept, Jack said. Though fair warning, once you get more than one human in a room, the chaos increases exponentially. But I'm counting on it, Emperor Zoltan said. The Empire has been stagnant for too long. Perhaps a little human chaos is exactly what we need. As if on cue, the Imperial announcer cleared his throat and addressed the gathered court. His Imperial Magnificence will now address the court regarding new security measures and the appointment of Jack Reynolds as Director of Unpredictable Security Operations. The court erupted into murmurs as Jack took his place beside the Emperor. For a species once classified as primarily harmless, it was quite a promotion. Just wait until they hear about my first policy change, Jack whispered to the Emperor. Casual Fridays are going to blow their minds. The galaxy, Jack reflected, had no idea what it was in for.